And the look of horror on this woman's face, her husband went from a sitting relaxed to a standing up, literally vibrating, red in the face, vibrating, and said, we're not going to discuss this. This son of mine is getting circumcised. There's no two ways about it. And the anger that erupted out of him, his wife actually told me she'd never seen him ever behave like that. And the look on her face was this shock of, who are you? Who have I married? She literally never seen him explode the way he exploded.
Hello, Intactivists. I have a guest with me today.
My name is Karen Mitchell, and I am a mother, a grandmother, a childbirth educator, and an intactivist. I first came to think about the subject of circumcision in 1986. Now, I was originally born in Scotland, and I have no brothers and sisters, and I had really never thought about the issue before in my entire life. When I was 26 years old, it had just never come up in my world to even think about it, to discuss it. I didn't really have friends with kids at that point. And then when I became pregnant, I had a voracious appetite to learn everything I possibly could. And one night we were home and watching the local news station where they did a story on circumcision. And my prenatal class also coincidentally was talking about circumcision at the time. And I had come home and I'd sent to my mom, I learned about circumcision at prenatal class tonight. And my mother just sort of looked at me strangely and said, well, you're not Jewish. Why would you think of that? Because in a Scottish world, it was a religious thing and nobody else sort of thought of it at all. So I sat with my husband watching this news show, and he was born in 1954 in Canada. And that was the time where parents were not asked. The baby was just basically taken. It was circumcised because that was what was done. There was no permission, no talk. So he was a circumcised man. And we watched this news program, and it didn't show very much, but it was enough for us to see the excruciating pain of a baby boy going through this. And luckily for me, my husband, who's now my ex-husband, but we're still friends, and I will always admire him for this. We both looked at each other and we said, no, we would never do that to any son of ours. That was as much as I needed to see. So I did actually have a son. So I had my first intact son. I did go on to get all my certifications. Sorry, I cry about this because it is so meaningful and so important. So I did go on to get my childbirth educator status. I was a doula trainer, breastfeeding counselor, attended many births. And during my years in births, I always felt that things would come, experiences would happen that would show me the truth, that I would be privy to these moments with people, with humans that were very primal. And in those times, I would be able to see what the truth of the situation was. So I thought back today when I knew I was going to be talking to you about my circumcision lessons that I learned through my career as a childbirth educator and how I believe the truth was shown to me. Now, one of the interesting things in my own family is that I had my first son, then I had a daughter, then I had another son. And when he was a little boy, about 6, I was in the next room and his dad and him were in the bathroom area, and my husband had just had a shower and came out of the shower, and my eldest had never noticed and never cared about, never come up. But my middle boy, who it was a little more kind of thinking and sensitive and like that, he said to his dad one day, he said, hey, how come your penis looks different than ours? And my husband said, well, that's because I was circumcised and you're not. And this bit of skin here, that's when they take that off. And my little boy at 6 years old said, but why did Grandma Gummy Bear let them do that to you? And that was what he called his grandmother, so my husband's mother. And when I heard that, I thought, interesting. So, because the mother is such the carekeeper and the caregiver for a tiny, tiny little baby. The baby comes out of the mother. The baby and the mother during the pregnancy, they're completely one, completely connected. And then as this baby is small, of course, if we're breastfeeding and as nature made things, it really is the mother that is the primary caregiver, and the father is the protector to enable that situation to take place and for everyone to be healthy and safe. And it really occurred to me when he said that from a child's perspective, he blamed the mother. The mother was supposed to look after a tiny little baby, and the mother did not look after a tiny little baby. The mother let someone cut the tiny little baby in his little mind. So that really gave me some perspective into how the thinking is on that. And I do believe, I have come to believe that there is underlying and completely unconscious feelings that I do believe many men have towards their mothers and women in general for that lack of protection. I don't believe that that kind of thought and feeling can just disappear. So that was the first thing. Years later, when I was doing a prenatal class, and I put a note down so I'd remember the 40-year-old virgin. But this woman wasn't a virgin, but she was 40 years old. And somehow in her 40 years, she had not found the right man and not also been able to get knocked up. So she had artificial insemination to have a baby on her own. She was taking my prenatal classes because she was a heavier woman and the doctor had advised her it would be, not the greatest to have a cesarean. And would she take classes so she could perhaps think about having a vaginal birth? So she came to classes, and one night before class started, she shared that she had just had an ultrasound and she had just found out that she was having a boy. And this woman actually cried. She was actually upset that she was having a boy. And you start to put the pieces together. Okay, so wait a minute, let me get this straight. You can't meet a man in 40 years. You can't get knocked up by a man in 40 years, which, let's face it, folks, isn't that difficult. And now you're crying because you're having a male child. Kind of smacks to me of, maybe I'm just simple, but it seems like you don't like men. And so sure enough, after the class, this woman actually, because I tried various things in my classes. I've had posters of circumcisions, I've had movies, I do discussions, and there was no one that ever left my class thinking circumcisions were good. And of course, I'm in Canada, so I would always start off by saying, so every licensed body that deals with newborn babies in this country is against circumcision. That is the physicians, the midwives, and the nurses all actually have position papers against routine circumcision. Canada, for many years, people have actually had to pay out of pocket, and it's generally a few certain doctors in each city that promote this practice, this abuse. And so after this woman had this baby boy circumcised, she got in her car with a newborn and she drove 45 minutes to my store simply to state that she had had this child circumcised in my face. And I realized then that, first of all, I think there's, as much as I could say, well, there's a lot of men who probably have a lot of hatred towards women for not protecting them as babies. I do believe that. And there's also a lot of women who have a lot of subconscious anger towards men for one reason or other. And I think that also comes out when we look at something like circumcision, because I've seen too many women that are far too devoted to this surgery when there's no reason for them to be. Logic is, there's no reason, especially in Canada, when everyone is basically telling you don't do it. And then you still go and you get money to do it, to pay someone. So those are a couple of the lessons that I've learned. I was getting my nails done one day in town, and I happened to see a woman who was training there. She was doing my nails, and she'd actually taken my prenatal classes 3 years before. And we had a conversation about my classes, and she wasn't trying to be mean or anything, but she kind of said, oh yeah, yeah, I took your classes. I didn't really learn anything, but yeah, whatever, da-da-da, da-da-da. She's doing my nails. And then about 5 minutes later, it comes up. She says, oh, but she says, after I watched that circumcision video, oh, I didn't have my son circumcised. And I thought, well, that's a win then for me, because I actually did influence her and I actually did change her mind on something. And yet this woman, she didn't even register that. It didn't even occur to her, even though she had just told me that my class changed her view. It didn't even occur to her. So that was really interesting about how unconscious people are about their choices and why they make them and where they make them. So that tells me that the rest of these people are going out there, and that's what they're making their choices based on, something very deep rooted and unconscious with no logic or information. So I had that. I think one of the most interesting experiences I had as well during the years, there was a video, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was a video about circumcision. But they really didn't show much. So it wasn't graphic, it wasn't difficult to watch. But there was one scene that I found particularly interesting, and it was a scene where a group of men were sitting around in a circle sort of a thing, and they were discussing circumcision. So they were discussing circumcision, they were discussing restoration, they were discussing their feelings, how they felt. So after I played this video, which I thought was quite important and earth-shattering, I've made a few mistakes like that in the years over some of the things I've decided to do. I turned it off and I asked the men in the group what they thought. And it was very strange, because I even had a man who was a counselor, an actual counselor in the room at the time. And these men were very negative and derogatory about watching other men share their feelings and having this real conversation about their penises and circumcision and how they felt about it. There was nothing weak about it. It was a fascinating discussion where men were just very open and sharing their feelings and their experiences. And I found that the men in the class were nasty about it. They were, like it was like somehow it made them weak to do that. And so it really backfired, because I didn't really get there was no sort of discussion that came out of it, because these men all just sort of shut these other men down for having feelings and talking about things. And I never showed it again, because it was just a waste of time. They were so unconscious about how blocked they were to it. And I think that kind of showed me about how in society we do this, we've done this, oh, we want men to have feelings, we want men to be sensitive, this whole thing about, oh, this toxic masculinity, and oh, men need to be more sensitive and men need to have more feelings and all this. But we don't actually believe it. It's a complete lie. As soon as they do share their feelings, as soon as they do say something real, they get literally stomped on by other people and other men who say, oh, no, well, they're just being weak, even though they weren't weak at all. They were just talking about their feelings. So that was an interesting experience that really sort of taught me something about how people look at the issue and refuse to sort of look at the seriousness, just like people, posting pictures about, ha ha, my little man, oh, he looks grumpy. He had his circumcision, as if it's nothing. It's insane. They're so brain dead about what the reality of it is. So that was one of my lessons.
Hey guys, it's me, Pods. I'm briefly interrupting this interview to let you know about the Pods e-commerce program. It is vital to keeping the Prevail Over the System channel alive. Go and join us on our Discord to learn more. And best of all, it's free to partake in the Pods e-commerce program, and we don't need any of your information whatsoever. This helps us keep the interviews coming along with other Intactivist content to empower, teach, and update Intactivists with very important information, as well as being the voice for the Intactivist public. Thank you all so much. Okay, now back to the interview.
I had several cases where I remember I was doing a private prenatal class, and it was Christmas time, and the woman had actually split up with the baby's father already because apparently he had a lot of anger issues. But she allowed him to be at this private prenatal class. So there was the lady, she had a girlfriend there. It was at her mother's house, and there was a Christmas tree. It was, pretty, and the father was there. And then when I brought out the circumcision poster and started to talk about circumcision, this man basically just out of the blue, he just got up and started screaming. He stomped his hand on the poster and he said, "My kid's gonna be circumcised and you're never gonna take that away from me." And he literally screamed at me and he stomped out the door. And I think I always remember that because of it was such a contrast between the gentleness of the woman's friend being there to support her having this baby, the sentimentality of this Christmas tree in the corner at the grandmother's home, and the anger that simply exploded out of this man towards me for even having a conversation about the issue of circumcision. And the way he thundered out of the door and slammed the door and screamed, I'll never forget that anger just bubbling up from nowhere. And that was one of the times. The other time it was also a private class. I suspect that people in the group classes, probably there were some of them that thought the same thing, but they didn't, they couldn't do that in a group setting because not everyone agreed with them. And so they probably were thinking it, but they never said it. So it was usually the private settings where these weird, angry episodes would erupt. This other couple who seemed to be quite in love, the woman was actually an actress, and same kind of thing, just brought out the poster. And the poster basically just showed an intact penis, penis circumcised by Plastibell circumcision, and penis circumcised using a Gomco clamp circumcision. And those were just the three little pictures on this poster, because I started to get to the point in my classes where I would simply show the facts. And if people were going to get angry about the facts, if people were going to get angry about, the reality of a picture, well, then that's a whole different story than thinking it's just some emotion or my opinion. And the same thing, and the look of horror on this woman's face. Her husband went to a from a sitting relaxed to a standing up, literally vibrating, red in the face, vibrating, and said, we're not going to discuss this. This son of mine is getting circumcised. There's no two ways about it. And the anger that erupted out of him, his wife actually told me she'd never seen him ever behave like that. And the look on her face was this shock of, who are you? Who have I married? She literally never seen him explode the way he exploded. And that was the another time that this came out. A big fan of Alice, the Swiss psychologist that talks about where we come from and how things affect us. And I do understand that the child must behave in such a way or feel that the parent is doing what they're doing for their best interest. I did see that in my own family when my daughter was pregnant and they didn't know what the baby was going to be. We, of course, had to have these discussions. My son-in-law is circumcised. Again, that was Canada in a time where it was mostly done. People really didn't think about it. And when the situation came up in our family, I could see it was luckily, I have a lot of respect for him. He's a very open thinker. He's open to thinking about new things. He's a very logical man. So he can take the information in. But I actually watched him go through that whole process. That process of at first being like, well, how can that be? Because my parents did that to me, and my parents did, loved me. My parents loved me. My parents did what they did and made the choices they made for me out of love. And so he went through that process, but he did get to the point where he said, yes, no, we would, I agree with, because my daughter unequivocally said, no, we would not be circumcising. And my poor dear son-in-law said, oh, I think if we circumcised a baby, my mother would kill us. My mother-in-law would kill us. And so as a very open-minded man, he learned the facts and he came to a reasonable decision and said, no, we wouldn't do that. And he was okay with it. He got through it. But I can see how that is a real struggle for men to really have to say, look, my parents might have made this decision because maybe at the time they thought it was the right thing. But now we know more. I know more. I don't need to make that same decision. And so for him and his parents, they all sort of went through this information together. And even at the end of the day, his parents said, if we knew then what we know now, we wouldn't have done it. So it shows how you can make a difference in people's lives by sharing information with them. And there are people who are willing to look at the information and actually take it in logically without emotion and respond to that. But there certainly is a lot of other people who just don't seem to have that ability to take the information in logically. So that's where I am. It's been, 40 years, over 40 years of talking to people about this issue, trying to educate people. Honestly, I didn't think we'd still be doing this. It's quite disheartening for me on the mommy groups to hear the mommies, oh, who did you get your, we're having a baby boy, who did you get your circumcision from, and blah, blah, blah. And then they'll put a little aside in at the bottom and say, not open to discussion. I don't want to hear anything. People who are just literally happy to stay in their ignorance.
They know there's something bad about it because they know there's a discussion, but they really want to conform.
Yes. Yes. And the thing is, in Canada, I mean, I think it's only 15% of the population. That's the other thing.
That's why it makes for a good argument to say that it's not common.
Yeah. Also, my eldest son is married, and him and his wife, when they were pregnant, it's a good thing my daughter-in-law, she's a tough chick because her family would have done anything to have my grandson circumcised. They and her mother, unfortunately, passed away when she was young, when she was about 17. So her mom and I never have had a relationship. But by God, if we'd have a relationship, it would not have been good over this issue because she had to fight every single person in her family not to have my grandson circumcised. They are all, it's like some kind of a family lineage that they all, and it's not religious at all.
Yeah, it's in a way become its own religion.
Yes, it's just some kind of a weird, this is what we do in our family. We don't need to hear anything else. This is what we do. And she had to be like, she basically had to tell them all, F off. I'm going to do what I want. And thank God, I'm very blessed. I'm very grateful that she had that strength. They were literally saying, oh, we'll pay for it. We'll pay for it. If it's the money, we'll take them and do it. If you don't want to do it, we'll take them for you. We'll do it. It's so I think there's a lot of that going on where it's like in families, and it's like, so even though people aren't conforming to the bulk of the population in Canada, they're conforming to their family's wishes.
Which is really disturbing, and it makes it harder to break the cycle. It's the reason that there's the group like Brohim for the Jewish people who don't want to cut their boys, and it creates a community for them, especially with Jewish people because they're very tight knit in their communities. So it's hard for any families in those communities to say, "Oh, we don't want to circumcise our son," because they got pressure.
And so it's hard for the rest of us too, as intactivists, to talk about it because then you're an anti-Semite to a group which has got nothing to do with it. I have no problem with Jewish people and Muslim people. I just don't agree with ritual circumcision. I don't, agree with it. I don't care if it's for religious reasons. It's abuse. It's mutilation. But if you speak out like that in society, you become, oh, you're a racist, you're a redneck, you're, and all these other slurs are thrown when it has nothing to do with religion. So yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, the family thing, I think it's a tough one to break. And thank goodness, I mean, she's broken it in her family, but the rest of them are they still think they're right for some reason or other.
Has it caused her to cut ties with her family?
Nope.
So they're still on good terms and everything. It's just something they disagree on.
Yeah. Yeah, they just basically agreed to disagree.
Okay, that was Karen part 1. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'll put her links down in the description below so you can follow her. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 2 and our other content that we release every single week. Please share and like this video to get this out to more people. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.